Hey everyone, welcome back to the YOUnify podcast. I'm Brandyn Keating, the CEO and co-founder of YOUnify, which is a nonprofit organization helping you flourish and thrive. And I'm also the host of our podcast. I'm really excited to be joined today by Dr. Sandra Waddock. Her latest book is called Catalyzing Transformation. She is the Galligan Chair of Strategy, the Carroll School Scholar of Corporate Responsibility, and a professor of management at Boston College's Carroll School of Management. Say that 5 times fast. She has published more than 200 papers and chapters and 16 books. Her books include Building the Responsible Enterprise, The Difference Makers, Intellectual Shamans, and Transforming Towards Life-Centered Economics. Sandra, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, Sandra, your work spans business, sustainability, and what you've even called healing the world. What first drew you into thinking about leadership in this broader, more human and systemic way?
Oh, that's a long story, but I'll try to cut it short. So I've always been interested in academically interested in how to make business better, how to make business do good in the world and not do some of the harms that it does. And when I did my dissertation, I did look at issues of leadership in cross-sector collaboration. So these complex things where public and private enterprises were working together. And that has evolved over the year to studying corporate social responsibility. And then about 10, 15 years ago, realizing that wasn't sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
The transformative change that was needed. And what we really needed was, and I'll put it in my terms today, transformation towards flourishing, for all, which includes nature as well as humans. And that a very different type of leadership is needed than we typically think of for that. So that's long story short.
Yeah. And you're also, of course, a contributor to the edited volume Leadership for Flourishing. And we'll get into your chapter in a little bit. But maybe it would be helpful just to share with folks how you define leadership for flourishing.
So leadership for flourishing is, in my view, taking a whole systems perspective. So most leaders focus in on the organization or the enterprise that they're initiative or whatever it is they're leading, but they don't think necessarily about the external context in which and how healthy that is in which they're operating. And yet, if you think about sort of from a relational perspective, if you think about how we all flourish, how we live good lives, well, we depend on a lot of different things for us to be healthy, for us to be well, for us to be happy. And that sort of external context, the ecological and social context really matters. And so leaders who think about flourishing think about it in that bigger context. It's not just what does my institution or enterprise or business do, but it's how does what my business does, let's keep it to the business context, how does what my business does affect the people with whom relates, the customers, the employees that we have, the people who've invested in our firm, the supply chain that we're working with, the distribution chain, and so on.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem.
And when I say ecosystem, I'm also talking about nature.
Beautiful. And you've also written about, interviewed, and kind of fit the description yourself of an intellectual shaman, someone who connects ideas and helps make sense of the world. Can you say more about what that means to you? It's such a cool phrase. And how did that perspective develop?
Yeah, so a long time ago, in the early 2000s, I wrote a book called The Difference Makers. I think you mentioned it earlier. And that was the story of how what I called, and at the time, the corporate responsibility infrastructure was evolving. And that included things like social investing, the UN Global Compact, a whole bunch of other, the Global Reporting Initiative, a whole bunch of other initiatives. And I interviewed the folks who were founders of those institutions, or in the case of SRI, very early participants in it.
Yeah.
And sort of realized that they were doing this kind of work of boundary spanning. They were creating institutions that they didn't sit as, they weren't strictly businesses. They weren't public institutions. They were doing this kind of bridging work. And so from that work, and they had certain kinds of characteristics, which I wrote up in the book and a couple of other places. And then I thought, well, there are academics doing that kind of work. And I have had a long-standing interest in shamanism. And in the early 2000s, I had started working with a shaman.
Amazing.
Sort of hidden side of, I'm never going to, and this is a modern American shaman. It's not any traditional culture.
Yeah.
It's because my belief is we all have these capacities and we can all do this kind of work. So what is a shaman? A shaman is a healer, right? In traditional cultures, the shaman is sort of the center of the community and the person who brings healing when the community needs healing or when a person needs healing. Well, in my view, our world needs healing.
Certainly.
Business practices needed healing. And I looked around my field and I thought, well, there's a bunch of academics, the ones I tend to admire, who are doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
I found 2 articles in the academic literature that dealt with shamans at all. Both were by Peter Frost and Carolyn Egri. And so I looked at their work, and those shamans, they identified as being, well, of course, shamans are healers. If you read all of the work on shamanism, which I had done a ton of,
yeah,
so that the healing is central. What are you healing? Well, if you're an academic, you might not be healing people in the doctor sense of it. You might be thinking, I got to make this theory better, or how do we make businesses operate better, or how do we make sure that people are treating each other well? So those are healing activities, broadly defined. So I was interested in the people who were doing that healing work. The other piece of it, similar to the difference makers, is this boundary spanning. So what traditional shamans do is they go to spiritual realms, gather information, bring it back, and use it to heal the community. Well, what the people I ended up interviewing were doing was crossing disciplines, doing multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary work, or crossing organizational boundaries, or functional boundaries within an organization, or sector boundaries. So they too were doing this, or disciplinary boundaries. So they too were doing this cross-sector work. And then, of course, the third aspect that Frost and Egri called spiritual leadership, I ended up calling sense-making.
Oh, interesting.
And because what do we do as academics? We take what we learn, we synthesize typically across multiple instances of whatever it is we're studying. We abstract that, and then we make sense of it. And if we're an intellectual shaman, we want to make sense of it in ways that a lot of people can understand. And so I studied 28 colleagues, people I admired.
Wow.
And interviewed them, and they all said, sure. They all said, yeah, no problem. Are you going to call me what? and I did that, and then I synthesized all this information from their stories and realized that there are a lot of people in the world who are trying to do this work. Today, I'd look at the people I've called in my more recent work transformation catalysts, or the flourishing leaders we were talking about earlier. They're all doing that healing, connecting. That's the boundary spanning, right? Connecting, sense making. That's what we do. That's what these folks do, and they can be in any number of realms. Many artists do this. Many psychologists, therapists, or teachers. They're doing that too. So it's not restricted to this notion of being I called it an intellectual shaman, but this notion applies across many domains.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, we hear so often about the damaging impact of silos, whether it's in disconnectedness, whether it's in our communities or in our business structures or government. So I love that you've identified these folks who are really working across those boundaries. And I also feel like it's easy for us to think about intellectuals or academics or researchers as sort of disconnected from the real world, like locked up somewhere in the proverbial ivory tower. So I love this idea that there's this whole subset that are actively doing healing, which is such a connecting modality.
Yeah, I'm not sure they wouldn't necessarily call it healing. It's
But that's
called
your sense making, right?
making of what they're doing. And, it could be healing the discipline, but it could be healing the organization, trying to make the organization better, or trying to make societies better.
Beautiful. So let's get a little bit into your chapter from Leadership for Flourishing. You talk about leadership for flourishing systems in the chapter. And for somebody who's like, never heard that phrase before, how would you kind of break down what that means if they're hearing it for the first time?
Sure. So you think of a system as sort of an integrated whole of something.
Mm-hmm.
So body is a system, right? An organization is a system. And the system level stuff that I'm interested in these days is sort of it's inter-organizational. So it could be something like the food system. How do we plant and produce food, get it to the stores, get it distributed? How does that all happen? So the way we produce food, or an industry, could be conceived of as a system, or a broader community, or even a bioregion.
Yeah.
And the whole planet, if conceived as a living entity, which James Lovelock has called Gaia, can be conceived of as a system. So for me, the question is, once I realized corporate social responsibility was not going to be sufficient to get companies where they needed to be, I started in thinking about sort of this bigger picture stuff, this whole system. Companies exist in the kind of ecosystem we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They have suppliers, they have supply chains, they have customers, they have investors. They exist in a community, and that community could depend on them. And if you're only thinking narrowly about, what am I doing to make profits tomorrow,
Right.
or today, then you're not thinking about the well-being of that whole big system that you exist in. But ultimately, your company or your institution, or let's say your industry, or whatever it is, whatever level of system you're defining, and we put the labels on that, right?
Yeah.
We say, oh, this is the system I'm interested in. That's not going to be healthy unless all elements work together in productive ways that help them to live their best life, just to put it. It's a life-centered approach, basically.
Yeah, beautiful. And so when people make that shift, when they start really thinking about taking care of whole systems and not just running their own specific organization, what changes?
It's a shift from thinking in fragmented ways to thinking holistic. Partly, it's a shift from thinking about me and how am I going to benefit, or how is my particular organization going to benefit. So in economics, there's a lot of talk of self-interested profit maximization. And it's a shift to the good of the whole. It's a shift to thinking about how do we benefit? How do all of us benefit in new ways? And what needs to happen to make that shift happen? I need to learn to think about the whole system. I need to think about the array of stakeholders who constitute my system. I need to think about the role that the natural environment, the rest of nature, we are human, we're part of nature too. But and that's a different way of thinking, because in Western culture we often think of us as separate and dominant over nature.
Yeah, that individualism.
Try telling a hurricane that.
Right, exactly. Or an earthquake or a flood as I sit here, fire as I sit here in Los Angeles. Yes.
Right. So, when we start thinking about, okay, if you think about Los Angeles, California, and all fires that have been faced, well, that's a part of that. I mean, California's always had fires, but, and it's part of the natural order of things. But the devastating fires that have happened in recent years are a product of climate change, which is human induced. So, you have to think kind of long-term, bigger picture.
Yeah.
We're really pretty bad at teaching that in universities, teaching the systems, our students how to think in whole systems. They can think in the function. I'm a marketing person. I'm an accountant, an operations person. But to think about the whole and how then your organization relates to the even wholer, bigger whole. If you know anything about complexity theory, they talk about fractals, which is nested, similar structures. So, you've got societies. Within those societies, you've got communities. Within those communities, you might have a business organization, and then a business organization has smaller units. That kind of fractal structure, self-similar structures that build on each other. If you see that relationally, you think, oh, I am related to all of those things, and their health, my health depends on their health.
Right. All interrelated, all interdependent, each piece impacting the other. Yeah, it's funny. It seems so obvious when we say it like that. And then in so many of our systems and institutions, we try to separate. And on that note, your chapter is co-authored with Jim Ritchie Dunham, one of the editors of the book, and he's done a lot of work, of course, on agreements fields, which come up in the chapter, And I'm wondering if you can describe to folks a little bit in everyday terms what that means, like what is an agreement field, and how does that relate to your work and what you're bringing through in the chapter?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it is Jim's concept originally. And so to me, the idea of agreements fields, and let's take it in the context of an organization, because I think it's probably easier to understand there, would be that it's sort of the implicit contract that you and I have about how we're going to treat each other. And when we agree, I mean, I believe everyone wants to be treated with dignity. And as if they have dignity, and we all have inherent. My friend Donna Hicks, who writes about dignity, would say we all have dignity, whether people recognize our dignity or not. And so you want to recognize someone's dignity, for instance. So when we establish norms and values in an organizational culture, then we're establishing that contract, that implicit. And we can make that an agreements field makes that contract much more explicit than implicit. It's always there, but often not expressed. And when we're making it explicit, we're saying, this is how I'm going to treat you, and this is how I expect you to treat me. And usually those are positive ways of being in that organization. I don't want to be mistreated, and probably you don't either.
Yeah. And so why do you think, based on all of your study of corporate responsibility that you've done over the years, why do you think it is that so many organizations still struggle to move beyond that sort of short-term thinking you were mentioning of like, where are my profits coming from today, tomorrow, and the siloed thinking that you also referenced?
Well, because of what you're saying, the siloed thinking and the short-term profit orientation. Now, think about it's a long story, but from the big picture perspective, really big picture, how do we understand what the purpose of business is and what economics is, the bigger system in which businesses participate? The current sort of, if you will, narrative about economics says, we're all people are self-interested profit maximizers. I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Markets, by the way, will solve all of our problems. Let's get government out of the picture. This is Ronald Reagan redux, right? But it's become much more extreme in recent years. And the only purpose of business is to maximize shareholder wealth. That's the extreme form. And yet, businesses operate under those premises. Oh, I can be if I personally can be self-interested profit maximizer, then of course my business is going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so the only thing that matters is my profits. And then you have Wall Street, the pressures from Wall Street, or especially if the company's a public company, pressuring companies to produce those profits and to produce that shareholder wealth maximization, which is share price going up. Has actually very little to do with what the company's doing on a day-to-day basis, or even necessarily its profitability. So, but those are the premises we're operating under, and they're short term because I have to show those results in the short term, typically for most companies, at least on a quarterly basis. And that forces some decisions to get made to make the profits or the share price go up in the short term, as opposed to making decisions and investing in employees, community relations, product development, whatever it might be, that is a longer term thing, doesn't have returns tomorrow that I need to show to my investors today. So there's a disconnect between sort of the good of the whole system and understanding of what the purpose of the firm is, and the reality, in my view, is, and as Jim's work has shown in multiple settings, and as some of my earlier work on corporate social responsibility showed, if companies do treat their employees well and do treat their customers well and do treat their stakeholders well, they're actually more profitable. But that's not how it gets translated into practice often.
And so for somebody leading a team, a company, or even a local community, what would be some of the warning signs that the system they're part of isn't really working well?
Oh, you disgruntled people, complaints, poor service, poor quality products, fractured relationships, people not trusting each other, at the individual level, and people not trusting the company's reputation getting damaged. At the whole ecosystem level, it would be people getting ill, not being able to support their families, things like that.
And so, as we kind of mentioned at the top, you've written about catalyzing transformation. What would be like one small but powerful step somebody could take if they've noticed some of those warning signs and they want to start creating positive change?
Yeah, so whole system change is long term. It's difficult. It involves many different stakeholders, groups, people, because you have to get people to get together. So getting people together in conversation, talk about what is going wrong and how that's the catalytic function. It isn't that I have an answer or a vision. I might have an answer or a vision that would be mine. But if I try to impose that on other people, I'm probably not going to get very far.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of a system that is comprised of many different organizations. I don't have control. Or I might be able to tell my team what to do inside an organization, or and I might, in a top-down sort of way, that might work. Would work better if the team were collaborating, together. But I might have that kind of control inside an organization. But in this context of multiple organizations coming together to try to improve sort of let's say a community, the relationship between businesses and nature, the kinds of practices businesses are using, I may not have that control. And so what I want to do is bring together a group of folks to talk about, who have some say in the state of the system, or some stake in the state of the system. Bring them together to collectively figure out what needs to be done and how to get it done, recognizing that it might not be my solution.
Yeah.
Or there might be 20 solutions that come out of that kind of conversation. And that different groups, different people are going to take pieces of that and do that. So I think conversation is really important. Bringing people together in new ways, helping people to see that, doing exercises. I mean, I can do that as an academic, of course. Doing activities and exercises that help people see the whole system.
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. And that power of, I feel like this comes up over and over again on the podcast, that power of connecting to one another. If we want to create change, if we want to change a system, the first thing, being able to come together, being able to discuss, being able to collaborate, to co-create, and bring something together into the world that we might not have been able to do ourselves. And I love that you named the role of dialogue in that and intentionally.
I talk about connecting 3 processes in this catalytic process, connecting, cohering, and amplifying. And this comes out of work I did with Steve Waddell and a group of other folks. An initiative during the pandemic, we were trying to work out how to bring about system change. And the idea of connecting is the bringing the people together, and the cohering is the visioning, co-creative visioning processes that you're just talking about. And making plans for implementation. My plans, your plans, our plans, right?
Yeah.
And seeing what happens when we try to do them.
Beautiful.
Changing course if necessary. Experimenting.
Beautiful. So everybody should check out the book, Catalyzing Transformation. Did I get the name of it correct? Catalyzing Transformation. And we'll put all of the links for that in the description on YouTube. And if you're finding us on another social channel, check out our links in bio to get those details. We also want to invite you into our Write the Future campaign, where you can get together with others in your local community, imagine the hopeful future, and take steps for making change together. And something you can do right now is go ahead and click the like, the share, the subscribe button. If you've gotten something positive out of today's episode, that really then helps more people to be able to connect with the information and the other guests that we have helping you flourish and thrive. And Sandra, how else would you like people to connect with you, or what should they know about what you have coming up?
They can, I'm at Boston College. They can connect with me there. I think the best way to connect with the work that I do is to do what you just talked about. That is the catalytic function, right? Bring people together. Start thinking about what in this community, however we define this community, do we need to do together? And understand, I think the book is helpful, or there's an article as well. The book is helpful in providing a framework that can be applied in lots of different contexts. It's not a rigid, you have to do these 4 steps kind of thing. It's think about how to do this for your community in a way that works. What does my community need? How can we go together? So it isn't about me, it's about us.
Beautiful. What a beautiful note to wrap up on. Our time has absolutely flown by. We're definitely going to have you on again. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening and watching. And thank you, Sandra, for joining us. And we'll see y'all next time. Awesome. So do you have a busy Friday lined up?